to turn my light on.
Now I'll let you know when I think it's now live. I'll formally check on Facebook. Yeah, I believe we are now live.
Okay.
And we're recording. So my name is Jonathan Cohn. I'm the chair of the Issues Committee with Progressive Massachusetts. Want to thank my wonderful guests with me here this evening to talk about issues around language access, as well as about combating the recent surge in anti kind of racism against the Asian American Pacific Islander community, especially that being fostered by folks like the current occupant of the White House. So I'll introduce everybody in I'll do clockwise order from my screen. So that would mean Karen, just stay who you are, talk a little bit about what your organization does.
Hi everybody, my name is Carolyn Chou. I'm the Executive Director with the Chinese Progressive Association. So CPA has been around since 1977. So we're based in Chinatown, but we serve mostly Chinese immigrants in the greater Boston area. And, we've been working on a lot of issues around housing justice, workers' rights, voting rights. And then we also have a youth program, and we also, have drop-in service for people to come in for questions that they have.
Nice. And then Carolyn.
Hi everyone, Carolyn Chou. I'm with the Asian American Resource Workshop. We are a Pan-Asian organizing group located in Dorchester. We work mostly with young adults and do some work specifically in the Vietnamese community in Fields Corner, as well as other multi-ethnic Pan-Asian program. Do political education, organizing, and some arts and culture work. And we've been working around issues of Southeast Asian deportation, housing justice and gentrification, and criminalization, particularly in the South Asian community in the past period. Yeah, happy to be here with you guys.
Awesome, thank you. And Lydia.
Hi everyone, I'm Lydia Lowe, and I'm on the board of Chinese Progressive Political Action. We're a 501c4 organization, which means we're a political advocacy organization that is a nonprofit but is able to do political endorsements. We work particularly around developing progressive policy platforms as a community and involving people at a grassroots level in deciding on what that platform should be, and then which candidates we should support in relationship to that platform.
Awesome. So when I talk about, a few things, as I noted, dealing with what the impact of all this has been on places like Chinatown, as well as the impact on the AIPI community in general, talking about language access from there, and as well, because you're all also amazing housing advocates, what needs to be done on that front long-term as well, building off of some of the initial steps taken. I remember at the start of when this was just starting back in February, it did hit Chinatown particularly hard. Not in terms of, let's say, the spate of, let's say, the DC thing hard, but this general aversion that people had to going into Chinatown just because of the association with what was happening in Wuhan, China. Can any of you speak to what has been a lasting impact of it from that on, let's say, businesses in Chinatown?
I think that, when this first started, when we first heard about, the outbreak, right, that's mostly in China, I think Chinatown was already, starting from end of January, is already impacted. A lot of businesses start seeing, decline 50%, and to a certain extent, 80%. And at that time, I think it was, people kind of see it as oh, that's just Chinatown. But I think at that time, I think that, the city of Boston and some elected actually trying to bring some attention, to the importance of supporting Asian business. I think also a lot of our allies, live in different towns, also try to organize events. But I think it wasn't until, the shutdown happened that it was oh, we really need to help people out. And I think that, in the Asian American community, what we are faced with is on one hand, there's the model minority myth, right? We're doing okay. But yet, in the Asian American community, the experience is very broad, and then also income wise is very polarized, you know. And then the other thing is like, well, one hand we are the you know, we are like the model minority. On the other hand, we are seen as perpetuate foreigners. You know, as soon as something happened, we are like, oh, that's them, you know, and we are not seen as, you know, part of, you know, we're not seen as Americans, really. Even, you know, people, we have been here for like, you know, generations and generations. So both of those things really kind of make it challenging for the community, you know, to, you know, sometimes, you know, to a certain extent to make a case help people who are vulnerable. But I think that also we'll see particular challenges to the Asian American community when we are looking at recovery. And then also most recently, you know, in Boston, we looked at you know, the people who are tested positive for COVID-19. Interestingly, you know, it's about, I mean, the data has been up and down, it's incomplete, but about, you know, 4 to 5% tested positive are Asian, but yet Asian make up about, I think today it says 11% has been 15%, you know, 11 to 15% of the death because of COVID-19. So that's concerning, you know, in terms of, but, you know, there's also a huge other category. So it's concerning to us, you know, who, you know, it shows that there's fear to get services and access to support. And we're constantly trying to figure out how do we do that. And yeah.
We're asking follow-up. Lydia or Carolyn, anything you want to chime in?
I was just going to add and say, I think in Fields Corner, you know, we're seeing similar situation just in terms of like fear, you know, the sense of being racialized as perpetual foreigners and the way in which that plays out for businesses and for individuals trying to navigate the world right now. And, you know, in Dorchester, we do have some of the highest COVID rates. And though the Asian numbers don't necessarily pan out, we know that, you know, lots of immigrants and refugees, particularly Vietnamese immigrants and refugees, are living in, you know, neighborhoods with high rates of COVID. And that's connected, right, to structural racism and refugee resettlement and lots of things. But yeah, there's a particular way being Asian in Dorchester has been playing out in terms of the rates here, and connected to the broader kind of anti-Asian sentiment.
And I just wanted to underscore that the economic impact of COVID, you know, it's, of course, it's going to be, the economic impact is the worst on communities of color and poor communities, and the API community is no exception. For the Chinese community in particular, the places, the areas where people's work is concentrated are either the hardest hit, like restaurants, hotels, food service, like cafeterias, or, you know, they are the frontline workers in the home healthcare industry and the grocery stores. So one way or the other, you know, the community is being heavily impacted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that, you know, and like, you know, Karen said, it started early. And I think it's gonna take, you know, months, if not years, you know, for us to see this play out, I think.
Yeah, that's especially when it comes to, say, like with like a restaurant sector. One thing that I've been wondering is how many of them will actually be able to come out of this kind of sustained period of sustained closure. Because whenever there's a discourse about, oh, that things need to return to normal, there's that open question of like, is there even a quote unquote like return to what it was on the other side? Like, and what will instead be permanently changed?
And I think it's been really difficult for a lot of the immigrant small businesses to access the, you know, relief that is coming down from the federal government. You know, I mean, already seen in the news how a lot of big businesses have been taking advantage of that. So it's been a challenge for the smaller minority-owned businesses in general, and I think for immigrant businesses even more so, because, you know, people are not as tuned in to the news as it comes out, you know, in English. By the time it comes out in your language, it's usually too late. And, you know, the stimulus loans, the small business loans, the first round just went really quickly before I think a lot of the businesses were even able to apply.
Yeah. Yeah, is there any work being done at all to even like help kind of, let's say, immigrant-owned businesses navigate that system, or just kind of, or has that just been like a complete afterthought from like those implementing?
I think that there are community groups that are trying to do that work. I know like in Chinatown, there are different community business associations that have been helping businesses. And I know, Karen has been working with the SBA district, staff person, district director, to try and set up a Chinese speaking Zoom so that anybody, who wants information in Chinese can come online and learn about that. But it's, again, this is, we're already like running behind, what we hope is going to be the second round of, of the CARES Act. And by the time that we get people familiar enough and with support enough to be able to fill out the form and do the thing online, we'll see what happens.
And I think that for the same reasons, that's why the moratorium that had passed, actually Massachusetts actually have the strongest eviction moratorium in the country so far. And one part of the moratorium actually includes commercial tenants as well. That's knowing that some of the small business will be impacted, by COVID as well. And we would like, a community to have, when we open again, we would like the community to have diverse, businesses. And then I think the other thing that's, that we are doing to kind of how do we deal with issues of equity. I mean, we're telling everybody everywhere we should really think about, right, putting equity in the center of everything. We want to return, to normal, but a normal that puts equity in the center. So we don't want the bad part to return to normal. And I think that also the other thing is that, it's the undocumented population. So actually Asian Americans make up 25% of the undocumented. And that is something that's really concerning to us, even though, we're a huge number, but in terms of having an organizing strategy for the undocumented, we have not been able to develop one yet because there's so much fear. And we're only beginning to do that now, using, together with ARW and other organizations, we developed a fund that's targeting, immigrant Asian Americans who are, undocumented and unable to access any, public benefit. So those are some of the things that we are thinking about doing. And I think there's also, different collaboration that are coming together.
I think, Carolyn, do you want to talk a little bit about that fund that Karen just mentioned, European CPA?
Yeah, I think it's been a really important intervention in this moment to bring Asian community groups and organizing groups right across the state together, and to really try to pool our resources and push past silos to fund our people, right? And it's not, we're only able to give small amounts, but in this time, like to be able to do that is something, and it also provides us opportunities to continue to organize and support folks long term. So right now, ARW CPA, Greater Boston Legal Service, Asian Community Development Corporation, and Viet Aid, and Cambodia Mutual Assistance Association and Lowell have been kind of the core conveners, but we're reaching out to folks in Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and Khmer, as well as supporting some folks in the Nepali community and other parts of the Asian community to get small cash assistance, and particularly committing at least a quarter, I believe, Karen can correct me if I'm wrong, but a quarter to undocumented folks, and just really understanding, as Karen mentioned, but in the Asian community, like undocumented folks are so are so deep underground that it is really a process to get folks to be comfortable to even take the resources. But we know that there are so many folks in all areas of the Asian community that are undocumented, and that, you know, our needs, our language access needs need to be part of the conversation around immigration reform and other pieces. And then also just to highlight some of the folks, you know, are undocumented in the more traditional way we think about it. And then, you know, over the past year or two, ARW and Greater Boston Legal Service have been working with Southeast Asian folks, so mostly Cambodian and Vietnamese folks who don't have work authorization because they have orders of supervision, meaning that they came here as refugees from the war, mostly as babies, and they made mistakes, you know, as teenagers, have U.S. criminal records, and now live in limbo to potentially be deported to a country that they may have never lived in, or, you know, to stay in this limbo state. So, you know, that's another population we've been working with, but is also part of this kind of broader set of folks who may not have work authorization, are undocumented in different ways, and are often kind of really on the margins of the conversation, but are really have been fighting and struggling and are particularly in this moment. And even those who are in detention right now, you know, we're very concerned. What's going on in detention centers and prisons is really awful, and the fact that folks aren't being able to get out when we know the rates are so high and it's spreading so fast, you know, is a big concern.
Quickly, if somebody wanted to donate to the fund, how could they do so? Yeah,
there's two links. So there's a donor box link. Maybe we can link it after. And also through a generous foundation sponsor, if folks can donate donate over $750, they can be matched through CPAs if you donate through CPA. So we can make sure folks get the links. And yeah, we see it not just as about providing cash now, though that's critical, but also around how we build long-term power and continue to organize our people and build connections across the different ethnic parts of the Asian community, and highlight all of our issues.
Awesome. So you were both talking about the impact specifically on the undocumented population. What are some of the steps that could be taken on, let's say, the policy level, whether on, let's say, on Massachusetts or federally, to make sure that we aren't leaving undocumented immigrants even further behind in the relief process?
So I think there's probably a lot of debate, right, in the State House. How do we do that? And there's a million Zooms on it, and there's various, you know, policies that have filed by different legislators. And you know, I think that it probably, you know, be important to really think about, you know, because I think that there's private donation, but also I think that the most important thing to me, I feel like, is direct payment to someone instead of having these long process of application, because that will mean that, you know, I mean, it would take, you know, a lot more effort, I think, also administrative costs for the state, you know, to have like a long-winded, you know, process and, you know, authorize this, authorize that. So I think that direct payment through existing programs, I would look at programs that are, you know, families with mixed status, and that are in. I know that, like, for example, like WIG, you know, that's a program that, you know, a lot of mixed status family in, and I would throw in other programs too that, and you just kind of like, you know, I mean, if there's a way for actually for the state to say that we're going to dedicate, you know, this much money or this percent of the stimulus money that goes to state and local government to help really the most vulnerable, and then create a very simple process for it. I think that would be the best, because I think that if you're going to apply, some people would be afraid to apply. I mean, people call us in the fund that we know, and that they're like, oh no, it's okay if I have to submit my personal information. And there's also kind of like, you have never public assistance haven't benefited. Why would you think that right now everybody's being hurt that you could? But you know, if you actually they get a check in the mail along with their WIC voucher or something like that, that might, be the extra, the extra income.
Yeah, and anything, Lydia and Carolyn, anything to chime in on that?
I think, yeah, like removing the red tape, making things accessible and in the languages that folks need it, and just like trying to move resources to people in this time when people are really struggling in serious ways. I mean, in the Asian community, as in many communities, a lot of folks are 1099 workers. Almost all nail salon workers are 1099 workers. There's a lot of gig economy work. So people are just getting access now. So, folks have gone the whole, even if you do have, like undocumented folks don't have access, but even if you do potentially now, people have been waiting. And so anyway, I agree with Karen, any way for the state to intervene where the federal government has been totally leaving people behind, and for it to be very simple and for everything to be very accessible linguistically is key.
And I just want to add one thing that we've been working on. I think that in this moment is probably most apparent why it's so important: data disaggregation.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about data disaggregation by ethnicity. And in this incidence, if we're talking about, figuring out how to make sure that everybody have access, right, to testing and treatment, this is where actually your ethnic information is very important, because it speaks to, how do you do the outreach? What is the information that actually, because when you talk, right, it's not what you say that's most important, it's what's heard and what we see that's most important. So if you actually have disaggregated data, then actually we can target, certain populations better. But yet, a lot of data right now are incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I hope that, this, as, state departments and state legislators really understand that, data disaggregation is not a controversial issue, and it's to help us in a situation like right now.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point, especially when you have public health data that you're trying to analyze, economic data that you're trying to analyze. Could you tell people who are listening a little bit about what is the data disaggregation, or the kind of like data equity bill? Like on the State House, like what does it do?
So it's very simple. It just says that for State Department that's already collects data on race, you collect it on ethnicity as well. And we're not saying that, people say, oh, there could be 20 ethnicities within, the Asian American community. We're just asking, do the 5 major ones. At least we have somewhere to start to get more information about, or to have complete information about a community. Representative Taki Chan is the lead sponsor for the bill. We were keeping track until COVID. So I don't know where it is at right now.
But it's one of the things that should have already passed.
It should have. It should have.
And I think as folks are filling out the census, like it is, in the census, we are lucky that Asian American data has been disaggregated for, I think, 2 or 3 censuses. Censi? What's the plural of census?
Census rounds.
Census rounds. Thank you, Lydia. And, I think it shows, right, it's important. It's something that's done on the federal level, and it's possible to do it on the state level. And just as a broader point, right, I think folks probably know this, but, the Asian umbrella, right, is really broad. It includes a lot of different experiences, different ways folks are racialized, right? South Asian folks, East Asian folks, Southeast Asian folks who came here as refugees from the war, different experiences and racialization. So I think part of it is, it's about the different language needs. It's about the different ethnic needs, the different places folks live, and making sure we're getting the right services to the right parts of our community, and not in a way that's about splitting people apart, but really about understanding our folks and understanding our communities in their fullness. And that's just one part of it, but it is a key part, right? If we want to make sure folks have accessible services and and services that reflect their needs.
While we're on the topic of legislation that we think should have passed, I think that this is also, there are so many different things that people are, that there's a lot of advocacy going on right now about this moment with COVID, but, a lot of pre-existing issues as well. And I think it's even more important for us to have a political voice in this period. One of the concerns is that, with the pandemic and not knowing when things are normalized, that we're going to be needing even more mail-in, absentee balloting. And of course, we don't have no-fault absentee balloting, in Massachusetts yet. And then it's even more important for immigrant communities and limited English proficient communities, because when you request an absentee ballot, even though there are bilingual ballots in different languages in particular districts where that community is concentrated, but when you request an absentee ballot, more likely you're getting that absentee ballot only in English or in English and Spanish.
Oh, wow.
And at least you're not guaranteed to get it a bilingual ballot. And that's just largely because of the timing, because when you get an absentee ballot, you apply for it and you have to receive it in time for you to get it in the mail, and then for you to mail it back to your city clerk or registrar. And that often means that the ballots, by the deadline for you to for them to mail it out to you, it's too early. It's too early because they're anticipating that time lag, and the bilingual ballots are not out yet. So that's just another obstacle that limited English speaking voters face.
And how long does it typically take them to actually get bilingual ballots? And I know even with bilingual ballots, there's also the issue of getting them transliterated as well. That's still a hurdle for non-English speakers.
Yeah, so usually you can apply for an absentee ballot anytime before the election. And you can apply saying, I want, an absentee ballot for all elections this year. You can do it up until, several days before. But usually what happens is people will apply, and then as you apply, they get sent out. So if you're applying with an advance time, because people don't want to cut it so close as like a week before or something like that. So if you're applying early, then the election department is sending you the ballot that they have for your district. And that's usually not bilingual. I think in some cases certain cities have made an effort to get the bilingual ballot out even as an absentee, but it's not a guarantee. And especially during federal and state elections, when the municipalities and the city clerks, they rely on the state to be printing those ballots. So the timeline is outside of their control.
Are there any cities that are actually being proactive on this issue, or is it kind of, they all kind of need to be they and the state especially need to be doing better?
I mean, I think the cities, so for instance, there are Chinese bilingual ballots in Boston, Quincy, and Malden. And I think all three of those cities are really trying to, address this issue. And there are Khmer ballots in Lowell. And, again, I think that those city clerks, are really see the importance of bilingual balloting and are making an effort to, get out, for instance, the absentee ballot. One of the things that's complicated about it, and the reason why sometimes especially elderly voters are preyed upon when they don't know how to fill it out by themselves, is that it's not just the ballot itself. It's hard enough, if you don't speak the language and you don't read it, and in the case of a Chinese voter or a Cambodian voter, you're not even familiar with the alphabet that's used. So, it's very difficult for you to read the ballot and figure out who to mark on the ballot. But not only is there that, but also when you vote absentee, what you get is you get a ballot and some instructions and these 2 different envelopes, and you have to like fill out your ballot, fold it up, put it into the inner envelope, fill out your name and address, and close the inner envelope, sign on it, and then you put it into an outer envelope, and then you have to put, make sure that it's stamped and that you have your return address, and then you bring that to the post office or get somebody to bring it to the post office. So it's that step that's extremely difficult for people, not only the balloting. And because of that, often people do need help from somebody in the community. So there are so-called community leaders that often prey on elderly, and they'll go and they'll just collect their ballots from them and vote for them. And we've witnessed this, many times in the community, and have brought this to the attention of election officials, time and time again.
What are some of the things that let's say either could happen on the municipal level or especially on the state level to be able to expand language access for the ballots? If we do both need it in any election outside of this, but especially now if we do move more mail elections.
So actually, Representative Aaron Michaelwitz had filed a bill, which was House 690, I think it was. Yeah, House 690. It was a bill which basically said, in any language where the Commonwealth already has bilingual ballots, and in any district where you already have it. So it's not starting anything new, but in those same districts and those same languages, you must also have the absentee ballot, and all of the directions and all of the envelopes that come with it also need to be bilingual in that language. So that was a great bill. Unfortunately, as everybody was busy with all the different bills, it got sent to study. So we're not sure, like when something's sent to study, and now with not even having a formal session, that's really a challenge. But we are appealing to the API communities, appealing to a lot of the kind of election protection, civil rights organizations, voting rights organizations, and saying this is a really important voting rights issue. And in this period, that every citizen needs to have the right to vote, and that includes limited English speakers.
Yes, especially since it would be, fingers crossed, the legislature does take up an election package to respond to this, something that needs to be a part of any response that they had to make sure of any comprehensive effort of making sure that we can have high participation without risking public health.
Mm-hmm. So basically, this whole bilingual ballot, and transliterated names, it's basically the situation where, imagine you go to a restaurant, okay? You're English speaker. You were giving a Chinese menu, and with the categories, appetizer, main dishes, or whatever, right? Entrees and appetizer. Except the appetizers and the entrees, you don't know what they are because they're only in Chinese. And this is ordering food. And we're talking about democracy, something that's fundamental, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's the one thing that I remember hearing before, that for many people if they read a newspaper, for instance, many of the times that there'll be a transliteration of the way that the names might appear in, let's say, in the press when translated are different from what they might see on the ballot, which just kind of creates voter confusion. And then on the issue of language access in general, how is the state doing on making programs accessible to people across languages? Now you have greater demand for, let's say, unemployment insurance and a number of other agencies. Are they actually making them accessible to people across languages?
Well, actually, the unemployment department was one of the first state departments to go multilingual. And that's because there is a lot of organizing around that. And so, the division, DUA, which is, they actually have a whole department that focuses on that. But, during this period, of course, it's been a big problem that there were so many people trying to apply, and that they, the state moved to this online and telephone claim service, and then they got overwhelmed with the telephone claims. For a while, they shut it down. That was really terrible. So now they've reopened it, and they have done a lot of new hires, including hires that speak different languages. But just the volume of unemployment, which has never been seen in history, is just overwhelming. And I think that's like the main thing that the Chinese Progressive Association staff, for example, is doing every day, is just helping people figure out like how to apply for unemployment insurance.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I think the state can do more around language access. I think that the problems that we're seeing now, you can probably, could tell that someone whose language is not English, the first language is not English, on average, probably even just to open your claim and unemployment, it's probably at least 3 or 4 weeks later than everyone else. And then this is just for some opening a claim. And I'm not even talking about, after you open a claim, there's like, informations that you need to correct or respond to your monetary determination and such. And this is just on unemployment. And we know that, there's, other things like, with DTA, right, with food stamp applications, right? And some people need to, mass health also. I think that, hopefully this is, people have learned actually how to actually do that. And, one of the problem actually we see is that, they really, for community-based organizations have been working with the community, can give guidance and how to make it work. But oftentimes we don't really seek out to do that. And this is an important time, for state agencies to look to the community-based organization who are working with communities on a day-to-day basis and say, hey, how do we best serve and streamline this? We have ideas how to do that, but only if, it's, the state agencies are receptive to it. And that would help take care of some of the backlog.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I know that, so a little while ago, we were talking about issues around the census, right? We were talking about data disaggregation, among other issues. I feel like the current kind of pandemic has like thrown census planning into a loop, basically, with kind of, what have your organizations been doing to make sure that, let's say, the Asian American community doesn't end up undercounted, as communities of color often are?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've all scrapped all our door knocking plans, so that's, it's a challenge. For folks, and also just for anyone watching who wants to get involved through the Massachusetts voter table and Mira, there are phone banks like every day, basically, to call voters in low response census tracts, particularly Dorchester, East Boston, Roxbury, so I think there's been lots of phone calling, lots of social media. I know particularly in the social media platforms that Asian communities use or different immigrant communities use, and other events to try to keep momentum up. I think there's, been some attempts with the food deliveries or like food any sort of food access resources to try to like drop stuff around the census, to try to check in with folks as we're doing cash assistance around the census. But yeah, it's definitely been like learning as we go, and a lot of phone banking, which is not ideal and does not reach the same number of people as knocking on doors does. And I know in Fields Corner, I mean, we've been trying just to post stuff up on polls, like just, I don't know, we just rogue flyer a lot these days and trying to get banners up where folks are driving. But yeah, and would encourage folks on this call, if you speak any other language, or even if you don't, to help make some phone calls. It's not a perfect system, but it's the best we got right now. But I think there's also been a lot of creative social media work happening. And I think there's like, people say, oh, not everyone uses social media. Well, most people now use social media, but the platforms they use or the places they're getting it might be different, depending on language and ethnicity and all that, but there is a lot of ways to be in touch with folks. In this time, I know CPA has been doing a lot of that. But yeah, it's been an adventure in trying to learn how to do it, but trying to just like get what we can up safely in the community and also be on the phones.
I think one of the things that's been encouraging too, I think in Chinatown, is that that a lot of groups are working together, and it's not just CPA obviously is the group that does the most grassroots organizing, but there are a lot of groups that are kind of collaborating to make sure that the word about the census gets out and using their existing networks. So tenant associations, calling their own members, the family associations, have been getting out the word just, before we had the shutdown, they were getting out the word at their banquets. And just, yeah, I think that's been one of the encouraging things about this moment to me, is that people are kind of less focused on just, your organization and your organization's name, and really thinking about what needs to happen for the community in this period.
Yeah, absolutely.
Karen, any comments on that?
Well, I think we did a lot of work, like Carolyn said, to prepare for the census, and we actually got a good number of organizations to be, QACs, questionnaire assistance centers, and that's like all out the door. and then, I think that, similar to kind of like, the same reasons why we want to, bilingual absentee ballots is that, when you're on the phone with somebody, it's like spelling of somebody's name could take a long time, like X versus S, and so the census, when they did the ID, I did not know that they have alphabets. That's a horrible idea. Just have all numbers. Numbers, it's a universal language. So if we, in 10 years from now, if we still have census ID, let's have it all in numbers. Because that was a nightmare for us to get the number. We're like, forget it. Let's just do the addresses, and like do it by building, right? And then I think the other thing too is like, while everything moved to phone, there's a lot of, scams that are happening. So trust is very important. And to know like who's on the phone. So we recruited some volunteers, but the volunteers, it's not the same as our staff, that they'll call and they'll recognize your voice, Yeah. And if you have a volunteer, they're like, I don't know, what do you need from me? My birthday, so, it takes a little bit to convince people that, to do that. So the work, like to get, if we can go to the doors, we probably could like take 5 minutes for one person, but on the phone, it could take up to like, I don't know, 20 minutes. And then I think also the language line that people call in, there's like a million recordings that is not in the language before you get to the person. It's just kind of like, why did we do that? Hopefully the Census Bureau is taking in some of these, feedbacks and change some of it, because we're supposed to have a smart system for the Census Bureau.
And then there are, in Boston and the Chinese and Vietnamese community, there are those language lines, but there are all those other languages that don't have lines. They just have the guides. And that obviously, without questionnaire assistance centers, is a huge concern. So I believe, Chinese and Vietnamese have lines, but like Khmer, I think just has a guide. And so, when we thought people could go into an office like Cambodia Mutual Assistance Association, that's one thing. But now, without that option, all of this is just becoming really challenging, especially for the less numerically common languages within the Asian community nationally.
And one thing I also want to talk about, because your organizations do a lot of great housing advocacy. So last week, the Massachusetts legislature passed that kind of eviction and foreclosure moratorium. I think Baker signed it earlier this week. Although that's just, it's a pause. Eventually that pause is lifted, and then there, like all the problems come back, right? if not more. What are some of the next steps that we need to be taking to guarantee housing stability, especially in a time of as strong economic insecurity as we have now?
Well, I think that we should think about rent control as a long-term policy. I think that, if you really think about if we did have rent control, we're not really sure how the housing market is going to be impacted when things reopen. But we know that in the last 5 or so years, property values, I know in Chinatown, have doubled and tripled. So there's a huge inflation of property value. I think it's been way too long that housing and land has been used as, a profit-making tool. We should really rethink about it as a, fundamental right for people. So really thinking about kind of like why rent control be important, because if we had rent control, that would have limited some of the land speculation. And when recovery happens, we would be in kind of like a better place. So, and then the other thing I think that, immediately after, if we really want to make sure that, people have, what it takes to actually move towards recovery, we should think about having, banks would bail out in 2008, after the crisis, right? It's now their time to do their part, to make sure that people have stable housing. I would ask for more of some of the corporate landlords to really create housing stability, especially people who have, earned so much from land speculation. Let's not, have what happened in 2008. And I think we probably also want to think about, there's a lot of these mutual aids, it's the model right now for, so that we can, make sure that everyone is safe and healthy. And we should think about, community control and ownership of land, and why would that be important? And how do we use, any sort of stimulus, money to move towards that? Because I think that, more kind of like community control ownership, it actually encourage more mutual aid. So when we're in a crisis, we'll be better off. And right now we have, a COVID-19, but there was a housing crisis prior to this. There's an environmental crisis, and that isn't really gonna, stop. But I think that this is a moment for us to really rethink about some of those things.
And then, Carolyn or Lydia, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to say that, I think the mortgage and, the eviction and foreclosure moratorium is a really important first step. And, like people said, it's one of the strongest in the country. But we need to make sure that beyond that the debt, I think part of the bill is that it can't be used against you in housing court in the future, but it's not like your debt is erased. And so there's actually, a growing nationwide movement to cancel rent and cancel mortgages during this emergency. And I think it's important to do both, because we don't want to cancel rent in a way where small landlords then end up in foreclosure because they didn't get rent. On the other hand, the big banks, they can afford to cancel the mortgages. Mm-hmm. So it's, like Karen says, it's their turn. And then I think long-term, like lifting the ban on rent control is an important longer medium-term demand that, that legislation was already in process, when COVID struck. Having a tenant option to purchase, or sometimes it's called a tenant right to purchase or right of first refusal, is another important thing, that we want to keep people in their homes and keep them in their homes permanently by taking some of those homes actually out of the private market and giving tenants and their or homeowners, if the tenants are going to be, if a building is going to be sold, that the tenants would have the first chance to buy it. And if they don't have the means to buy it, that they could partner with a nonprofit that would work with them together. So those are just a couple of things, that are important. And then, there was also the idea of having a luxury real estate transfer tax, so that the luxury developers who are making all the money off of speculation can actually be paying into a fund that creates more affordable housing.
And so we were talking about how like Massachusetts has a ban on rent control policies on the local level. For those who don't know the history, can you just quickly say like when did that come about and like why do we have such a seemingly absurd ban like on the books?
So I think it was 1994 that the state actually banned rent control, and it was done through a referendum. Unfortunately, what happened is the few cities that had rent control, including Boston and Cambridge, actually voted for rent control. But because it was a statewide ballot question, all the other cities and towns contributed to defeating rent control. And ever since then, it's been like something that no politician wants to touch, and nobody wanted to talk about rent control until this year, I think, because the displacement crisis was reaching such a point that there's been popular demand for rent control.
One thing I always think about when it comes to say like the way in which we have on the books so many like bans from municipalities passing their own laws is that like whenever we see like in some other state where the say conservative legislature will try to take away like a deep blue capital city's ability to pass its own laws, and I think like Massachusetts beat you by a number of decades or even like a century on stuff like that. Whereas but people in Massachusetts don't, that's not even like on the front of our minds that like this is something that's already the case here that we need to address. Carolyn, do you want to chime in on?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that this moment shows us, like, starts to show us what is possible in terms of housing justice, right? Like stopping evictions and foreclosures, which we all know have devastated so many folks that we have organized with, that we know in our neighborhoods, that is not, doesn't have to be the way it is, right? And so how can we really use this moment to both put in the policies we need right now to stabilize folks through this period, which includes, as Lydia said, and Karen talked about, canceling rents and mortgages so folks don't just get saddled with debt coming out of this. And also helps us really all push together for what is possible, and I think Lydia laid out some of those policies. Obviously, we've all been talking about rent control as a key one, but no matter where we end up coming out of this, that there's an opportunity to start to really collectively understand housing not as a commodity, but as a right, and start to try to move policy that gets us closer to that place. So both to get us out of this moment, but also because it hasn't been working for our folks for a long time, and we have been fighting against evictions for a long time. So yeah, how do we keep building?
I think that's a kind of essentially a great frame as we think that like the goal is not to return to back to normal. It's to get a better, like have a better like kind of world come out like on the other side of this for as many people as possible. As we kind of near the close, I'm going to say, what would be some of the main takeaways that each of you would want, say main takeaways for somebody watching, and what are some of the action steps that you would want somebody watching this to take?
I think that there's been, a lot of, talking about in the media on, anti-Asian violence and, hostility, bigotry and, all that stuff. And I think it's important for us to actually understand the Asian American experience. And actually on May 11th and 12th, there's going to be a long 5-hour series on, on PPS. And this is a good time, we're all home, to really, watch it and really understand, I'm going to put it on the chat, about the Asian American experience. And I think that, we're also, working together, with ARW and other organizations to, have conversations about it and for people to talk about, because this, the anti-Asian thing is not new to us, but it's exacerbated in this, and then of course leading by, our president. So, and so it's important for us to, for people to actually raise that awareness. And I think especially for young people too, I think that we've been hearing a lot of, Asian American students in school are being making fun of, and they already were making fun of, but when COVID-19 happened, it was, exacerbated by, 10, 20 folds. And we want to be sure that we're going to be there to support, the young people. I think that, it's an important moment for us to really think about why, centering around people and equity is important. And as we talk about, do we have a right to a community? Do we have a right, to our homes? This is a moment that's very clear that it is important. You're asking us to stay home, but do we have a safe and healthy home to stay? And that, if, I need support, who do you think will support us? Is my neighbors and my friends. But you can only ask for support if you can talk to your neighbors. You can ask for support, you can communicate with them. And this is why we've been saying that, gentrification and displacement breaks the social fabric, of the community. And this is why we need to keep it. And that's why we're fighting against displacement.
Awesome. And then say Carolyn.
Yeah, I think Karen really hit on a lot of the big points, but that we, I think, just as she said, there's been so much conversation around interpersonal instances of hate, of harassment and violence against Asian folks or folks who are racialized as Chinese. And, I think that it has been impacting a lot of us personally, but also to understand the way in which anti-Asian racism works as bigger and broader and about what's undocumented folks being excluded from benefits, about, gig workers and the way folks are treated, about evictions. It's about all of these things, and that I just hope we can continue to understand anti-Asian racism, both in terms of the acute instances that are happening now, but also the broader, structural forces that are hurting all of our folks, and that there's a lot of hope in folks showing up for each other, the mutual aid, the way where people are building, across, like in my neighborhood in Dorchester, across lines of language and race and income, and showing up for each other. And that I think, it gives me a lot of hope that we can build something different coming out of this, and that we can shift some of those structures. But yeah, that's just what we've been thinking about, how we kind of understand anti-Asian racism in all the ways it shows up, while also, supporting folks through the particular traumas people are experiencing, and the harassment that is happening, and of course, and showing up for each other.
Yeah, I think what's so important about this moment is that on the one hand, there's a lot of hope in our basic humanity and how people are relating to each other. And then on the other hand, just massive, I just feel massive anger at the system. And, everything that's wrong with the system is exposed in this moment, is a good thing. But, will we have the power to actually make the changes that we need? So I think that, in terms of what do we want people to do, I think that, we all need to be speaking up wherever it's possible and saying, we do not want another corporate bailout. We want a people's recovery, and a people's recovery that is a new normal, not back to normal. And I think that, that means, and I think that includes that we need to have a political voice. So I think people should be calling their electeds and saying, we need to be sure that we have no fault absentee balloting, and that should include multilingual access as well for every voter.
Awesome. Well, again, thank all of you. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Karen, for joining this evening. I think this was a really enjoyable and informative discussion. And thank you to people who are listening right now or will listen to this later.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.